Hi guys, it's Kristin of Kristin's ArtCart, and I'm here to invite you to watercolor with me and paint this beautiful sunflower. Sunflowers happen to be my favorite flowers. I think they're just so happy and they remind us of summer and of fall, which is my favorite season. So that's why they're my favorite, and I'm really excited to teach this watercolor sunflower to you. I've painted quite a few sunflowers, of course, since it's my favorite flower, but mostly in acrylic. This is my first watercolor sunflower. Whenever I paint in watercolor, I tend to have a very watery approach, a very abstract approach, very whimsical. I love that look. So that's one of the reasons I'm going to use that approach when I teach you. The other reason is if you happen to see a watercolor painting that has a lot of detail, a lot of intricate, crisp, defined aspects to it, that is very, very difficult to do in watercolor. So since our lesson is for recreational purposes, I think we'll stick to a whimsical approach. And I do just really think, especially whenever you are painting organic objects, nature, flora and fauna, animals, flowers, trees, I think that that organic approach is just so applicable. It's just so pretty. It just has a good relationship because what you're painting is a natural thing. So to have a relaxed and whimsical and abstract approach often works very well. So whenever we paint this, we're going to begin by drawing just a little bit. Okay, I painted it once and I was like, yeah, I like that. That's pretty. I can teach it. And then I painted it again to decide how I would teach it. And you can see they're pretty similar. One is a little bigger than the other, but like the basics are the same. Each has a face and petals and the same number of leaves centered in the picture with some negative space around. But as I said, this second one did get bigger and I think it still works, but I think we need to be careful how big we allow our sunflower to be. And here is why. The negative space works around this. It gives it a nice backdrop. Whether you decide to paint the negative space or not, I think the negative space works. If this face gets too big and the petals get too big, they will end up taking up all of the paper. It would almost be like a zoomed in, like a Georgia O'Keeffe look, which I love. But the problem with that is if the face is so big, it has taken up the paper and there's no negative space around it, what's going to happen when there is negative space around the stem and leaves? It's not going to work. It's going to be top heavy, out of balance, just not attractive. So we want to make sure that we don't allow our sunflower top to get too big. So for that reason, we are going to do a little bit of drawing first with a pencil. Don't be nervous. It's going to be so easy. It's a flower. So, and this is not a detailed drawing. This is simply to do a very faint map so you know where to put your paint. That's the only reason for this drawing. We're not putting any of the details in. I'm going to show you one that I have ready, and look, you probably can't even hardly see it. I drew so faintly because when this is painted, we don't want to see these pencil lines. And watercolor, as you know, has a very transparent nature. So we don't want to have big dark pencil lines or pencil details to try to, cover, and we don't want to incorporate them. We want to just make sure that they're so faint that they will naturally become part of the painting. Okay, so when you draw, I want you to have the lightest touch, so faint, okay? When I draw to demonstrate how to draw this, I'm going to use a black marker because with the glare and everything, I want you to be able to see what I'm doing. But I want you to not only use a pencil, I want you to draw so lightly, okay? Super light touch, okay? Now, we're going to begin with the face of the sunflower, and it's about the size of a tennis ball, I would say. I think that's a good reference. It's going to be floating just above the middle of the page. So I'm going to go ahead and put kind of a bumpy, because it's a sunflower face, right? It's not kind of oval or circled. It's a tennis ball size in the middle of the paper, kind of floating above the middle of the paper. They do have a pretty big stem, sunflowers do. They're pretty substantial. It's more like a stalk, but it's not a trunk, okay? So don't get too carried away. You don't want to make it too big. I'm going to have it turn, like bend just a little. Do you know that sunflowers do that? You probably know that they follow the sun. Another reason to love them. So we're going to go over to the side a little bit and then down. I'm getting just slightly thicker toward the bottom, okay? Now, there are 2 leaves on one side and 3 leaves on the other, okay? It's just to make it a little more interesting. A little bit of symmetry will happen around the top when we paint our petals on. A little asymmetry, a little bit of things being not quite balanced on the bottom will make it interesting. So the first leaf is kind of curving up and away from the flower. So here's how you're going to do that. To make the bottom of the leaf, you're going to grow out of the stem, over a little bit, and down. Now to make the top of that leaf, it's going to get a little wider at first, and then get all skinny and neat, like that. And when we paint, this will be darker, this will be lighter, and that will really reinforce and accentuate the fact that that leaf is curling up and away. The other leaf on this side has a little bit of a stem connecting to the stem, and then it just sort of does your typical leaf, like little bowl shape. Careful how thick you make those connecting stems. I hope you're drawing very lightly. If you're not, you better erase and start again. You don't want to see those pencil lines, okay? All right, now the first leaf on this side, it's almost like you're looking at it from the side, like across it. So it almost looks like a ribbon. It's so thin, it's because you're looking across it. So I'm going to do that by going up, down, and up. Little arm reaching. And then it's going to be very skinny, get a little thicker, and get very skinny again. So see, you're like looking across the leaf. The other 2 are going to be lower and close together. And I'm not going to draw both sides of the stem. I know that when I paint it, it's going to get a little thicker. I don't need to draw both sides. I want to make sure that this is skinny. So I'm just going to draw a line and then the bowl of this leaf. When I paint it, it will be thicker. And then another one down here, which is much closer to the stem. Something sort of like that. Okay, this looks awfully cartoony, I think because of the marker. Yours is in pencil and so light that if you held it up and showed me, I wouldn't be able to see it. I hope. Okay, now we're going to paint. So if you need to pause and set up your paint, I'm going to show you what I'm doing. I have just your basic old watercolors here that are in a box, you know, the cake kind. There are fancy watercolors, professional watercolors. There's watercolors that are liquid, that are actually like watery. And those are fun. They're very bright and vibrant. They're slightly more difficult to manipulate, but they're really cool. And speaking of liquidy, you can actually use food coloring to watercolor. If you don't have watercolor paint, you could have an empty egg carton and put the food colorings in there. And if you don't have paint brushes, you could use a Q-tip. You really could. I have just a few little ones. I don't even know why I have a few, because I'm sure I'm going to use this guy the whole time. I love square brushes. Watercolors often come with a brush, and even like Crayola, I mean, they're often real hair. Like, there's no reason why you can't use that. Okay, so I have my watercolor, and I'm going to move like this so you can see my setup. I have my watercolor and paper towel and my water jar right here. I am going to put the paper that I'm going to paint on right here so that you can see it, and I'm going to put my screen down so you can watch me. And I'm going to paint upside down. Isn't that impressive? Okay, so if you're all ready, we're going to begin. I'm going to put the paint right here in my jar so you can see what I'm doing. Okay, now we're going to begin with the petals. They're going to go around the face of the flower. I know you can hardly see it. There's the face of the flower, and we're going to go around with petals. Here's how I would like you to start. I want you to get some yellow paint. You want it to be a little bit dark, The less water you use, the darker your paint will be when you watercolor. The more water, it's watered out, right? So it's lighter. I'm going to go around the perimeter and just put little dashes. You'll see why in a minute. This is going to help us sort of keep ourselves in check. We don't want our flower petals to be too big. We want to make sure we have them placed nicely. And when we begin to paint them, we want them to be fairly symmetrical, meaning the same size on each side. I know it's in a flower, it's organic, it's not perfect. However, if there's like short petals on one side, you know, it's just not going to be as attractive. It's like, why did that side, you know, what happened? Did somebody come along, chop those petals? Now, here's what I'm going to do. I put that right around, so it's like a little childish little daisy, little sun, little cloud with legs. So now what I'm going to do, between each one of these, I'm going to paint a petal. I'm just going to go whoop, whoop, like a flame. You know, they do not have very particularly, you know, crazy shaped petals. They're just basically like a ribbon or a flame shooting off, a ray of sun coming off the face of the flower. So you don't have to get too concerned about having this perfectly formed petal. Sunflowers are not about that. They look like the sun. So you're just going to go around like I am. There is going to be rows and rows, row after row of petals on here. We're starting with the first row. Now I'm going to just go ahead and color each one of those in. They don't all have to be the same shade of yellow, okay? Some can be a little lighter. I am not going back and getting water each time I paint. This isn't because I'm trying to like conserve water or anything. I just don't want my paper to get too saturated. Right now we are painting wet on dry, wet paint on dry paper. As we continue and we layer these petals on, eventually we're going to be painting wet on wet, wet paint on wet paper. And that's a technique and I love the effects of it. The paint separates, it pulls and spreads, and I love that look. I just don't want it to happen just yet. So I'm just going around and placing. I'm going to get a little more water finally. Water makes it lighter, and yellow is already so light. So this first row I kind of want to be a little bit bright. Now, you know what I'm going to do? In between these, I am going to put almost like little hairs, little ribbons. You might be like, what is that all about? It's like the flower has a bad hair day. What it is it's these back petals, these straggly guys that are in the back. They're the back row. We're going to layer rows on top. So the ones that we're kind of putting around, you don't have to get too carried away with these. One of my versions that I already painted is a little bit like fluffier and bushier than the other. But just have fun and give your sunflower's face a couple little straggler. Oops, I went to orange. Don't want to do that yet. In between. This will help provide that bottom layer of petals. Okay. My next step will be to now introduce some orange. So I'm going to work up the orange here. And to do this, you can outline a petal. See how I did that? You can just put a line in. You just try doing both, going around. You can actually paint an orange, solid orange petal on top of where there is yellow. just do both. Sometimes it's a line, sometimes it's an actual solid orange petal, sometimes it's an outline of a petal. Either way, you are layering orange into this flower's petals, and you are giving another row of petals. Remember I said wet on wet? That's starting to happen here. That petal that I painted on top of happened to still be pretty wet. Now my orange is doing that fun separating and spreading that I love so much with watercolor. Maybe a few ribbons. I like that. Now I'm actually going to introduce a little bit of red. Very little though, very little. Little goes a long way. Maybe on that piece of orange, maybe here, maybe in the middle of that one. See how I'm almost gonna just go around the clock and put a little bit of red. I think that's enough for now. I can always, maybe a few lines. I can always add it. I'm now going to add some brown. Accentuate the petals. Sometimes I'll just put a row or a line. Some lines. Just kind of going around, and I'm going to keep layering with orange and yellow and brown. Until I kind of like what's happening. It's a balance. We don't want it to get so watery that the paper begins to break down. And we also don't want these wonderful, beautiful little pulling effects that are happening to happen so much that the result is, muddled. We don't want it to get too far away from us. So you just have to every so often sit back and decide how you feel about things. You can always go back in after this sits a little bit. Keep making those petal shapes. You see? I'm liking it. I'm like that. You have to be careful holding up a watercolor. The water will run. Maybe just a couple more and we'll let it rest for a while. We'll give this part a break and focus on another part, which is the face. This is where you can relax and have fun, truly. See what happens when you coax the paint this way and that. I'm going to let the face rest for now. I can always go back to it. I am now going to introduce some green. Often you see green in a sunflower's face, but another reason I'm adding some green is it gives a nice relationship. It's a connection to the stem and the leaves, having just a little bit of green in the face and a little bit of green in the petals. Not everywhere. You know how a lot of times sunflowers have like a center it's either dark brown or black or green. And then it's like the, you know, and that's the color of the seeds in that center. And then the seeds around that are a different color. So you have that circular effect in their seeds in their face. That's what I'm doing here with the green. I'm putting some green there, maybe a little bit here, maybe a little there. Here and there. I say that a lot when I teach. I feel pretty good about that. I think that's good for now. I am now going to go in with red, which might seem crazy, but it provides a nice undercolor for the brown. So we're going to meet the petals now. Go right up against that green. With some red. And now I'm going to add brown. And when I add the brown, I want it to be pretty dark. So less water, more paint, right? And I'm going to just kind of just have some nice little brush strokes. See what happens when it meets that wet red paint. I love that look. It's mixing a little bit. And some of the red I will allow to show through, but most I will cover with the brown. There we go. Just kind of boop, boop, boop. Because remember, it's seeds. So that's help, you know. Another approach would be to intricately draw and paint every little seed. We're not. We are implying, we're giving the impression of seeds with our little boopity boop brush strokes. Okay, now I'm going to add black, believe it or not. A little bit of black, just a little, around the perimeter. And decide right now where you are not going to add black. Like I'll probably not put black right here. But everywhere else, I'm just going to go like this. Little bubble of black there. Let it pool. Let it spread. And make some fun effect. It reinforces the bumpy nature of the seeds in the face of the flower. I feel it reinforces that rustic feeling you can often feel with sunflowers, that harvesty kind of feeling. I'm allowing it to pool. If it ever pools and starts to run, stop it with your brush. Stop it. Stop it. There you go. That's one of the ways you can control it. Once it's there, you don't have to let it take over. There, I feel pretty good about that. And now I'm going to let this sit and work its magic. I'm going to let the paint make some decisions on its own. And I'm going to spend some time on the stem and leaves now. So with the stem, it's going to be a base coat of just green. So I'm going to just go ahead and get it up behind the petals and come down. Like that. While it is wet, I'm going to do this. I'm going to take some black and I'm going to mix on the lid of my watercolor package some black, some brown, and some green. I use a lot of green. I'm going to need to get a new little cake of green. I'm going to mix it up over here and create like a camo shade, an olivey, camo-y shade of green. And I'm going to take this and I'm going to almost like drop it. I'm not really painting, I'm not really brushing. I'm gliding my brush along and letting the water fall off and pull and spread. Things always, almost always, get thicker as you paint them. They often get bigger, right? So it's a good thing we started off with the stalk being just a little skinnier. I like that look a lot. I'm gonna let that sit a little bit now. Now, when we paint our leaves, when you are painting something that has light areas and dark areas, as most things do, you have two options with watercolor. You can start and get the light stuff down first and then add the dark, or you can add the dark and pull it and manipulate it in order to make the light part. And I'll show you what I mean. On this first petal, I'm going to start with regular old green. Okay. Ooh, I got like a chunk of green on there. Get it off there. So I have just green on the part that is closest to the stem and on the bottom. Now I'm going to clean my brush and I'm going to use just my wet brush to pull that paint, and it's going to be lighter as it goes away from the flower, right? Up here, it's close to the stem, it's under the head of the flower, it's under those petals, so it's going to be darker. As it pulls away and it's out into the sunlight, it will be lighter. So that area is naturally lighter, and this is a little darker. Now let's make it even darker. Let's use some of that fun camo green that we made. Go along the bottom of the leaf. Go where it's curling away. See all that fun pulling? I love that, guys. All right, now we'll do the next one the same way. We'll start with our base green. We'll go underneath. Whoop, that leaf's gonna have to be a little bigger. There we go. That's the thing about watercolor, is it is not as forgiving as acrylic or oil. You know, you can always wipe it off immediately if you catch it right away with acrylic paint. You can let it dry and paint over it. But with watercolor, usually once it's there, it's very hard to completely remove it. There's a couple little tricks. Grab a paper towel and hurry up and blot it, stuff like that. But often once the paint's there, it is so hard. Now I'll show you what I meant by blotting with the paper towel. Say you wanted an area here to really be light, almost white. You could put the paper down and remove it. But you have to do that very, very quickly before it saturates into the paper and the pigment's there and then you can't take it off. But sometimes you can. There's an example. And I'm going to leave that because in this picture, I left some white on that leaf and I like how that looks. So I'm going to leave some white there. I'm now going to introduce a little yellow to my leaves. Make sure I don't go into where I want that white to be. Isn't that pretty? I'm going to put a little up here too. I like that look. Now that we've done the lighter parts, we put our base green on, we put some lighter parts on. Now I'm going to put some of the darker. I might take some straight brown. Let's get some of that water out of there. I'm going to take some straight brown and add it to this leaf, I think, for the dark part. I like how that looks. I might take some straight brown to my stem. Do a little bit, just a little bit of those ridges with brown. Not being perfect or detailed about it. Just enough to imply some texture. I like that. There, I leaned on my paper and I made a green mark there. I'll show you how you can sometimes get it off. I got it off. All right, now I'm going to do the other two leaves and then check things out, see if there's anything I want to do to improve anything. I'm going to mix up a yellowy green in the lid. Sometimes I like to blend right on the canvas or paper, as I've showed you, and sometimes I like to mix it up on my palette. For watercolor, this is my palette. So I'm going to mix a nice yellowy green. And I'm going to start with the light part this time. I'm going to get that light part on this skinny ribbon of a leaf. He's hiding behind the petals here, so I got to fit him around there. I like that. And now I'll use some of that camo green that I still have here and make it darker on the bottom ever so slightly. This little ribbon is up close to the flower's head like this guy was, so it could be darker, especially where it's close to the flower's head. As it comes out here, it would get lighter, right? We could even put a little brown. Just all layering until you see a result that you like. I like the look of that. Now we'll do these two little guys down here. I think for them, I'll start with the light color as well. They're far away from the flower's head. They would be the lightest on here probably. Maybe we can even leave a little white on them too. Use some water to pull even that light color. I often try to paint with brush strokes going in one direction. When I paint with watercolor, every once in a while, I'll go back and forth, but mostly I try to go in one direction, and that's simply because I do not want to break down my paper. That's something that happens often with young children when they are painting with watercolor. They press hard, number one, and then number two, they go back and forth. So then the next thing you know, there's little balls of paper that are created because they're breaking down their paper and they get so frustrated, but that's why. Now I'm going to get a little dark green. It's just the straight green. Maybe I'll add a little brown. This time I'm blending right on the painting. Maybe I'll take those two colors all the way to the stem. When you do these stems, guys, you want them to grow out of the other stem. You don't want them to look like somebody like stuck them on the side with a tack or a nail or something, right? You want to make it look growing, organic, and natural. Maybe a little more green. This is pretty. I'm liking these colors. I love green. It's my favorite color, which is probably why it's the most empty puck in the watercolor pan. And I like that being left maybe a little yellow, and then that's it. And I'll leave that white part on that leaf. I like that. That yellow is a nice effect. I'm liking this, guys. Yes, I am. Now, it's always a little bit tricky to pick up a watercolor. Let's take a look and see what we think. It's always a good idea to sit back and assess. Do you need to do more before you decide about your background? Do you need to do any more to the actual subject? I'm thinking a little bit to the petals, maybe. I'm very happy with the leaves and the stem. Very, very happy. I think I'll do a little bit more to the face of the flower and the petals. I'm thinking a little bit more brown in my face. I'm just going to mix up some brown and let it pool. Plop it on there, let it pool. Just another lovely layer, another little plopping and pooling effect that will make these look like seeds and just make this very pretty, a little more interesting. I might want to choose a little bit of a watery brown to let it affect that green a little bit so it's not quite so green, you know. It's definitely still green, but now it's been diluted a little bit. It's a little bit, I like that. Now I might take a little bit more brown. You know what I might do? I have this liquidy brown here. I think I'm going to mix some orange and brown together on this. Let's see what I think. And maybe let that also provide some details. Some petal shapes here and there. An actual solid brown. It's funny how being upside down gives you a different perspective of what you're doing. It's kind of hard for me, even though I can see it, the same for me to get a complete good idea. Let's take a look. I'm liking this. It might be time. Whoops, see what happens when you lift it up? Or it's running, but I kind of like that effect. That's okay. I might do another one like that. It was a happy little accident, not to borrow everyone's favorite televised artist's term, but it's applicable, so I'm going to use it. Yep, that was a happy accident. I like how that looks. A little bit of black is dramatic. What's art without a little drama? I like that a lot. So you take your time, relax, have fun, experiment with the watercolors, see the different results. You can choose to use a very lovely washed out blue. That makes a very pretty background. I'm going to try a red. Let's see what happens with some red. I like that. You can choose whatever color you would want for your background, or you can even leave it white. It's lovely white. Because it's centered like this, one object in the center with the appropriate amount of negative space around it, you don't always have to paint your background. Now, my young artists probably say, what do you mean? Because I always make them paint everything. But every once in a while, you arrive in a situation, especially with watercolor, because it's paper. Somehow there's a difference between blank paper and blank canvas. I don't know why, at least to me. So you get the idea. Red's quite lovely too. Seems to have more of a, because it's warmer, I guess, it seems to have maybe more of a fall feeling. than blue would. I don't know though, because red also reminds me of summer. Get the idea? Isn't that pretty? And I'm not going right up against everything. It's okay. That's part of this fun, whimsical, watery, abstract approach. It does not have to be perfect. So we can leave some white peeking through like we did on the leaves. Same thing with the background. Now, here's something that I could have told you at the very beginning. If you tape your paper down, which you might not at home, I don't know what I do, but I often like bump into my paintings. And you know, there's nothing more frustrating than your elbow or your wrist knocks your painting off the table and then there's a mistake. So I did tape mine down. Might have been smarter for me to make donuts of tape and put it underneath. That way I won't have white corners, but I can always paint them. And because this is a crazy, watery, imperfect background, it's not like it's going to be hideously obvious that, hey, those corners were painted later, you know, because it's kind of an inconsistent amount of paint all over anyway. But you can always paint donut or tape donuts on the bottom, or you could tape the entire perimeter so that when you remove the tape, you almost have a framed feeling. If you do that, here's a tip though, and I tell all my students this: take your tape and put it on your clothing first, you know, your knee of your jeans or something. Press it on your clothing a couple times and then tape your paper down. And here's why. It will still be sticky enough to hold your paper, but when you remove the tape, it's not going to rip the paper. Okay, I learned that the hard way when I was teaching in schools. There's nothing worse than a class full of second graders and they're removing the tape from their art and their art is ripping and they're very upset. Then you learn right away to come up with a strategy to prevent that from happening. I think if you mixed red and yellow, well, yellow with the teensiest bit of red and made it very, very watery so that you had sort of a peach background, I think that could be real pretty. There's something about that blue, but I like the red as well. Perhaps it helped you to see me do it before you chose. A lot of wrist work here. You don't have to commit to this very, very complete looking background. You know, it can be complete looking without filling in every single space, as I said. Do it, sit back. You can decide after you sit back and look at it, oh yeah, well, a little bit more would be better or something like that. Often an area being a little darker than the rest of the area can provide drama, make it a little bit more attractive. So I'm going to make this corner, I'm going to make the red here darker. I think that's what it will do. It will make a little bit of drama. Now the paper puckered a little bit because of being so wet. It's no big deal. It is, you know, I don't have to tell you this, but obviously place a couple big heavy coffee table books or cookbooks or something on top of it for a day or two and it will be pressed nice and flat again. That's another thing that's great about watercolor is how easy is it to frame these, you know? You don't have to pay an arm and a leg to have somebody frame it for you. You can simply pick something that you like, mat it or don't mat it. So there it is. Let me get this. Oh, there it is with a red background. It's running a little. There, it's running some more. Here it is with the blue. Here it is with none, which is really pretty too. You could, choose a colored matte and a nice rustic frame, bronze or antique gold or black is always great. But there we go. You take your time, let it dry, maybe tonight or tomorrow morning or whenever you're painting. Maybe hours later you'll walk by and it will be dry and you will say, oh, I love that. Or you'll say, I want to go back and change this or add this. You can still do that with watercolor. But you can see all of these areas that have pooled and puckered, they dry so beautifully. You get all of these fun effects that I think are so very pretty. I hope you enjoyed this watercolor lesson. If you did, feel free to like and share and subscribe. And maybe we'll try it again sometime. Thank you so much. Have a great day.